Welcome to our Spreecast. This is called. It's a new technology that we're playing around with, which we think has significant promise to bring us a little closer to all of you. We've used it now a few times in the last few weeks and been pretty pleased with it. We'd love your feedback on how you think it works. And I'm bringing in Christian Ramos right now from our team, who's going to explain a little bit to all of you about how to use this, and then I'll dive right into my political analysis. Christian.
All right. Hello, everybody. My name is Christian. I am helping out today with the Spreecast. Just a couple things that I want everybody to keep in mind. The cool thing about Spreecast is we can take questions from anywhere, anyone who is watching. In the chat box down here, you can chat away. Comments, anything like that, it just popped up there. Or with the blue key on the side, you can put up a question or query, if you will, on the screen. And I'm going to put one up right now. So you submit it, it goes up, I accept it, and then I throw it on the screen. Questions go here, NDN, MPI. And then finally, if anybody wants to talk by video with Simon, throw everybody up on the screen, that is also possible as well if you have a camera. Just indicate that you'd be interested in talking in the chat menu, and then I will add you as a video participant, and then we'll throw you on the screen as soon as Simon is done. So without further ado, I bring you Simon Rosenberg, who will take it over for the rest of the remainder of the event. Simon's, I just threw you on the screen, and I'm not sure where he is.
There we go.
There he is. All right, he's back. Simon, you want to say something real quick?
Still learning how to use this. Anyway, welcome everybody. Look, here's my basic take on the election, is that right now where things stand, and I think there has been, if you think back to where the election was a year ago, or where the general climate in the country was a year ago, the Democrats had, after having had a remarkably successful election in 2008, getting 53% of the vote, the highest Democratic candidate had gotten for president since 1964. The Democrats had a very tough election in 2010. The Republicans obviously won many seats in the House and the Senate and broke over 50% in the national vote, a significant achievement. But things have changed a great deal from where things were a year ago. I think the combination of the country learning a lot more about the Republican economic philosophy in a time of great national challenge, one that seemed ill-equipped to deal with the challenges in front of us, and particularly of late, Barack Obama's intense focus on the struggle of everyday people, the popular plan that he came forward with right after Labor Day to deal with the economy, the rejection of austerity as the path forward for the country, and having, as he calls it, a more balanced and mixed approach to deal with some of the economic challenges that are in front of us, that the political climate has changed. And on our blog, I have a link to a whole series of things that I'm going to refer to right now, so I'm going to go through it quickly. Some of the things are things I've written, some of them are things written by others in the last few weeks, and so I'm going to sort of refer quickly to a bunch of this data. But in the Wall Street Journal NBC poll taken a few weeks ago, which to me is probably the gold standard national poll now, and particularly because it has strong longitudinal data going back many years on the same questions, which allows you to compare a single question year in and year out over time, is what we've seen is a shift in basic favorability of the two political parties. That right now in that poll, the Democrats had a favorability rating of 40 to 37, 40% favorable, 37% unfavorable. The Republicans were 31-44, a 20-point gap between the two parties. And when I went back, I was surprised by that. I mean, it was a much bigger margin than I would have anticipated at this point. And when you then went into the data and looked at where, over time, where we saw analogous numbers to that over the last several years, those two numbers were similar to where things were the week before both the 2006 and 2008 elections, which were very significant victories for Democrats, and at least a 10, if not 12 to 13 point, depending on how you cut the data, right, shift from where things were a year ago. So the relative favorability of the two political parties has gone through a very significant change in the last year, moving away from the environment of 2010 into a new environment of 2011, much more favorable to the Democrats. Similarly, a Pew Center study came out yesterday that showed, when asked the basic questions about who do you blame for the stalled Congress and the gridlock, many more people blamed the Republicans. There's a substantial gap, 17-point gap in the country between those who blame the Democrats for the gridlock in Congress, the failed Congress, and those who blame the Republicans. Which is why I wrote an essay recently based on this collection of data that it's really, when you hear commentators say, well, the Congress is very unpopular, Washington is broken, it's sort of a pox in both your houses, people blame both parties equally, that's just fundamentally not true. There has become an opinion that is settling in the public that people may not be enthusiastic about the Democrats, but they're incredibly disappointed with the Republicans, and they're coming to a conclusion that the Republican Party is much more at fault for the inability of Congress to tackle the country's problems than the Democrats. I've been tweeting for fun to Joe Scarborough, who seems incredibly fond of this pox in both your houses line, which I think is in some ways is a polemicist way of dealing with the unpopularity of the Republican Party right now. Because when you hear him say this almost every day, it's just not based on data. It's based on his wish and fantasy that the country was blaming both parties equally for what's gone wrong. But they don't. And I think they're seeing the Democrats trying hard and the Republicans blocking and blocking and blocking, which I think is, by the way, a fair assessment of what's actually going on, right? If you look at even in the Pew poll, some of the guts of the poll, questions like, who's trying to reach across party lines? And the Democrats get very high numbers on that. So the second point is about where the presidential race is, which is connected to the first point about the overall climate, but it's also independent of it. And what you have to realize is that in 2008, Obama got 53, McCain got 46. In this last election, the Democrats, got in the mid-40s, the Republicans got in the low 50s on a national level. And then basically, it's almost impossible for a national political party in a two-way presidential race to get below 46% of the vote. I mean, that in some ways the rock bed for the two, which McCain got, by the way, because Obama got 53. And so when you look at the head-to-heads now between Obama and Romney being the stronger candidate in the general election polling right now, Obama's ahead in virtually every poll. He's ahead in some polls by 5 or 6 points in the national polling. In some of the polls, it's 1 or 2 points. But I think my guess would be if you did an aggregate, it would be a 3 or 4 point advantage for Obama. But what's important is where the numbers are. Obama's is at 46, 47, 48, 49. In some polls, he even gets to 50. The Romney is at 42, 43, 44. And so Obama may be a few points below where he was in 2008, but the Republicans are also below their number in 2008, in sort of the rock bed number. And Obama's winning in virtually every poll. And by getting now, I mean, the thing that you hear, the Republicans and those who are going on the air attacking Obama for being a weak president, is they constantly use his job performance and his economic performance. And those are nice, and it's interesting data. That's a good thing to use. It's just not as important as the direct head-to-head. And when you look at the most important data, not secondary or tertiary data that is not always predictive, Obama's winning this election right now, and he's in some ways in much better shape. Because a few months ago the polls were Obama in the mid-40s. He's moved up into the high 40s now in this election. And remember, if he gets 50, he wins. I mean, that's the point. Is that if he wins 51-49, he only has to win by half a percentage point, a quarter of a percentage point to win. So winning is winning. And Barack Obama right now is winning this election. The Democrats have a much better structural advantage in terms of basic favorability right now. The Republican Party, as we all understand, has a particularly weak set of presidential candidates who have had a very disappointing debate, I think, about the future of the country. And on one subgroup that we follow here and a lot of people follow here very closely, there's a new poll out this week of Latino voters who are going to be consequential in Florida, the 4 southwestern states, states like North Carolina, Virginia, have very substantial Latino populations, even potentially Iowa. Obama's at 69, the generic Republican is at 20. And so just by comparison, Barack got 67% of the Latino vote in 2008. McCain got 31. And so today, where things stand with this enormously consequential voting bloc, Barack is overperforming where he was 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and the Republicans are down by 10 percentage points with the likely nominee, I shouldn't say likely nominee, but one of their potential nominees, Mitt Romney, having spent more money attacking reasonable immigration positions than any candidate in the modern era, and I think being irredeemable in the Latino community. I don't think the same is true of Gingrich, who I think has been much more enlightened, perhaps, in the way that he's dealt with Latino voters and the immigration issue. And then finally, if you look at some of the state polls I'm going to read in my notes here just to make sure I get it right. Just in the last week, this is recent data, right? This is not stuff that's from a few months ago. I didn't cherry pick data. This is just the most recent data. Obama's ahead by 6 in Virginia, 7 in Florida, tied in North Carolina, 2 in Colorado, 2 in South Carolina, right? He's doing better in one poll in South Carolina than he is in North Carolina. I don't think they'll hold out. Up 4 in Pennsylvania. And similarly, if this was a pox in both your houses year, and if that was the general dynamic of the election, that people were angry at both parties and that they were going to take it out on the incumbents the way they did in 06, 08, and 2010, then one manifestation of that we would assume would be what would be happening, that the Democrats would be in significant trouble in the Senate. Democrats have 2/3, 23 of the 33 seats that are up are Democratic-held seats. They're in a very vulnerable position in this election if the tide swings against them. And the truth is, right now, if you look at the data in the Senate races, and the Politico, I put up on the blog, Politico has a piece today that's out saying that Democrats may actually hold the Senate. There's really only 2 Senate races right now that Democrats are trailing consistently in the swing races that really matter, that will determine control of the Senate. There are only 2 races where Democrats are consistently trailing. And if you look at some of the other swing races that are going to be consequential, Massachusetts, new poll, up, Democrats up by 7. New Mexico, new poll, Democrats up by 7. Virginia, new poll, Democrats up by 5, right? That would be consistent with my argument in points 1 and point 2 that the dynamic in this election is trending Democratic, that it's not an anti-incumbent year, it's not an anti-pox in both your houses year. It's that the Democrats are actually doing pretty well and the Republicans aren't. And I think there's additional data to reinforce that in the Senate. I know this goes against conventional wisdom, but that's certainly my take on where things stand. And so just to summarize, I think the dynamic of this election is that Democrats are, after having not significantly engaged in the economic debate in 2009 and 2010, are fully engaged. And the public is getting to know what the Republicans stand for much more than they did before on the economy. They like what the Democrats are saying, don't like what the Republicans are saying. They're blaming the Republicans more than the Democrats for the chaos in Washington, the disappointment in Washington. And the 2 parties are 20 points apart in basic favorability. The structure of this election is trending Democratic right now. And Barack Obama, I would argue, is in much stronger shape for this re-election than is the conventional wisdom. And finally, if you look at the Senate right now, the Senate is certainly this idea that no matter what happened in the presidential, the Senate was going to flip and the House was going to stay Republican. My own view right now is that all 3 of these things are up for grabs. The Senate's up for grabs, the House is up for grabs. John Boehner's approval rating has plummeted. There is clear blame being placed on the Republican House for what they're doing. And I think the presidential race is obviously up for grabs. It's very close, but Barack is winning right now and is certainly in a much stronger position because he's starting to lead on the core issue that he didn't significantly engage in 2009 and 2010, which was the economy. Sorry this went so long. I didn't mean for it to go as long as it did. But now, thank you for listening to me. Really appreciate you guys spending time with us today. Happy to take your questions and comments. from the crowd here. You can either hit that, as Christian said, hit that blue button, comment question, to get into the queue, either through text or through video, if you want to pop up in the video, or if you just want to put something into the little box here, you can do that too. It's nice to see that my son Jed, who's 11, has joined us today. Jedio, if you're watching, welcome. Really appreciate you joining us. How about it, guys? Christian, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no. We have the first question up here in the queue, and just like you said, you do it through the comment question thing, and I'm going to throw that up there. It's from John. Simon, who do you think wins the R primary, and how do they match up with the president? I'm going to come off here, let Simon answer the question, but again, if you have questions, put them in the rolling thing down there, and I'll throw them up on the screen, or you can comment and question on the side. And go ahead, Simon.
Yeah, I have a strong opinion about the Republican primary, which is that, I think that the only thing in some ways that's settled in the Republican primary right now is that Republicans do not want to vote for Mitt Romney. I mean, he's a guy who's never been able to get out of the mid-20s. In many polls, he's actually dropped over the last several weeks. And the truth is, and I know this cuts again against conventional wisdom, I don't think Romney's a particularly good politician. He's only won one election in his entire career. He's not particularly agile and adroit in his public speaking. He feels phony and fake and rehearsed and inauthentic, I think, when he communicates. His actual flip-flops that he's gone through, this transformation, he went from being a sort of moderate Rockefeller Republican in Massachusetts to a fire-breathing conservative, reinforces this sense that he's sort of a manufactured, inauthentic candidate. And I also think in a year where this election could very much be about the 99% and the 1%, it's hard to imagine a Republican who seems more prototypically of the sort of noblesse oblige class who have been seen to have contributed to our national decline than Willard Milton Romney. And I just think he seems like the wrong guy at the wrong time, and certainly the Republican primary audience seems to be rejecting him. I have a sort of soft spot in my heart for Newt Gingrich. I mean, I think that right now he is the front runner. He's ahead in Iowa. He's ahead in South Carolina. He's ahead in Florida. A lot's going to change. We don't know where this is going to go, and we know that because of proportional voting allocation, that this election could actually go on for a long time, and I can talk more about that if you want. On the Republican side, but I don't have the same view of Romney, I think, that is being expressed in the sort of conventional wisdom chatter game. I thought he was impressive last night. I think he's clearly a guy who has architected and created much of the modern argument of the conservative movement. I think a lot of the stuff that he was saying last night felt very comfortable and familiar for conservatives, and that when there's suspicions about the rest, Newt becomes the devil they know versus the devil they don't. And I know that, people in Washington may not view it that way, but certainly I can see Newt winning this thing. And I think it would be a terrific election next year if he does. And I'm not of the belief that anything is a cakewalk. It's every election is up for grabs. Everything starts even. You got to fight it out. I think there would be an unbelievable debate about the future of the country if Newt were the nominee, much more compelling and intellectually interesting than if Romney was. And I think our country, during a time of tumult and change and global transformation, could use a big spirited debate. So, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not an expert, but certainly I thought Newt was impressive last night. And I think, he's the reason he's doing well is because he's actually better, I think, than most of the other guys, if not all of them, on the stage. And again, an election is about choices. I mean, the Republicans clearly do not have, and finally I want to say about the Republican primary is that, I don't know that any of these guys on stage last night can actually unite the Republican Party if they win. It's a very factious party now. There are, the Tea Party's element is very much at odds with the more establishment Republican sort of zeitgeist, and it's very possible, I think, that there could be a third party candidate running who isn't necessarily a quote-unquote centrist. I mean, you could see the Republican Party split into two, perhaps along the lines of 1912 or other analogous times in our history, but I'm not convinced that any one of these particular candidates have the ability to unite the party and lead it against Obama next year. Next question, Christian, right? What should the president do to seize momentum in 2012? I think the president has had, and one of the essays on my blog post today at ndn.org/blog, and I'll put it up here in a second. Christian, maybe you can put it up in the thing, the link to it. Is a piece I wrote about. I had been on TV a bunch, having to make the case for Obama's reelection a few weeks ago. And I started really thinking about what is he going to say? In sort of as this debate unfolds, as the president has the State of the Union, the budget, they're going to have $500 million in advertising to tell, a very powerful story in 10 to 15 states, which is, plenty of money to get into, having a very sustained and serious conversation with voters, in these places where he'll be able to get deeper than the top lines that usually dominate, the day-to-day headlines. And I think the president's going to be able to tell, a reasonably powerful story about his presidency. It's amazing to me when I go on the air and I hear these analogies like Jimmy Carter and the president hasn't done anything. And, if you really are honest, from a foreign policy standpoint, we have the end of he kept his promise on ending the war in Iraq. And he did it. He was able to do it because of the adroit management of the situation. He has obviously made significant progress in dismantling Al-Qaeda and killing bin Laden, and made significant progress in weakening the global terror threat. We've seen an explosion of democracy in the most troubled region of the world, in North Africa, Middle East, which is historic and extraordinary by any measure. And it's obviously very early and can go in a lot of different directions, but there's been significant progress made in what is the remaining sort of global trouble spot. Christian's putting up the link to the piece that I wrote about this. On domestic matters, clearly the economy is in much better shape than it was when the president came to office. He isn't responsible for having created the budget deficit, the financial collapse, the recession, the 10 years of declining wages and incomes that preceded his presidency. And I think what he said in an interview that he gave this week was that, look, I didn't cause these economic problems, but certainly I feel like we haven't done enough. And I think that's fair. And what it means to me is that the president's got to keep the focus on the economy. He's got to be creative in an FDR, to be inspired not just by Teddy Roosevelt, as he was in Kansas last week, but by FDR, which is to continue to be creative and try to throw things there to get the economy moving again. Rob Shapiro has a terrific essay on our blog this week about some ideas about what to do for next year, and I want to recommend everybody read that. But at a political level, he's got to keep the focus on the economy and win the economic debate with the right. I think the Republicans are in a very bad position for 2012. I don't think they actually have an argument about jobs and growth. I don't think they have an economic view. I think they have a fiscal view, and I think one of the greatest accomplishments of the conservative movement in the last 30 years have been to conflate fiscal and economic policy in the eyes of the elites. I think we're going to have one party, the Democrats, having an economic orientation, and another party having an orientation around fiscal policy. And I think the Democratic approach is going to be much better, and I think the country needs to have a big debate about how globalization is changing our basic structure of our economy, and that we have to raise our game, all the stuff we talk about here. And I'm confident the president can win that debate. If he wins the economic debate, he'll win the election. And if the economy doesn't go bad, right, if it's middling or getting better, I think he'll win. I think he can win re-election. It's not a guarantee, but I certainly feel right now that given the structure that I went through at the beginning, and given the significant improvement in the economic narrative and argument that's come out of the White House in the last 6 months, that that Barack Obama goes into 2012 in pretty good shape. We got a long way to go here, and there's a lot of variables that could make things. There's a lot of dark clouds out there in the economy and global affairs, but certainly I think he's in much better shape than any of us would have imagined a year ago. I've got time for a few more, guys, if you got anything else. How do you think the president sells the economic success of his administration? I covered that a little bit a minute ago, but I do think that on a basic level, making some simple arguments that, and I know that everyone is unsatisfied with it, could have been a lot worse, but that's actually true. The country, if you look at polling data on this, and I cover this in some of my essays, that the country doesn't blame the president for what's gone wrong. Only about 30% of the country blames the president for the current economic conditions. There is disappointment in what he's done, and that there's a sense that he hasn't done enough. And I think increasingly, as the Republicans block, the president's going to be able to authentically say, and it will be true, that he wanted to do much more and he wasn't able to because the Republicans wouldn't let him. And I think the Republicans, in essence, the stuff we've seen over the last couple of months is going to be used, I think, by the president as a bludgeon in the election next year. But I think that he's got to say be clear about what he's done, is that he's, made the healthcare system substantially better and more consumer friendly. He's started to really deal with costs in the healthcare system, which nobody else had really been able to do up until this point. By the time the 2016 election rolls around, there will be many millions of Americans fewer who don't have health insurance. There will be substantial improvement in people's lives through that. There's already 2.5 million young people who have health insurance today that wouldn't have had it if it wasn't for the president's health care plan. I think that if you look at what he did in terms of Dodd-Frank, the financial system is much more consumer friendly than it was previously. We've seen significant investments made in long-term R&D, in expanding our exports out of the United States, in tackling some tough free trade agreements that were important for our growth of our economy. There's been significant improvements in K through 12 education, a community college bill that is bringing quality community college education to many more people than before and radically improving the community college system. We've made critical investments in clean energy that may be controversial on Fox News, but in the real world, I think are seen as being smart and prudent strategic investments that are critical in a important new industry, the 21st century. I think this guy has a legitimate record, and there's been a lot done, and I think that he's just got to make the case. And I think obviously things could be better than they were, but if anything, I think this idea that I wish I did more. Oh, and also the auto bailout, which has obviously been very successful. Detroit is having a good year this year, and in 2011, I mean, I left out a few things along the way, but I think he's got to say that, look, if anything, I have regrets that I didn't do more. I wish the stimulus was bigger. I wish we had made more investments than we had. And that certainly the things I've tried to do since the 2010 election have all been blocked by a recalcitrant party that seems more concerned about protecting their donors than they are about pursuing, advocating for the national interest. And so, I'm okay in where he is. Next question. Thanks, by the way. Hey, Jonathan, how are you? It's good to hear from you, my friend. It's been a while. What will the House and Senate look like after the election? I think they're both up for grabs. I think the one thing that we all have to recognize is that the Senate will, in all likelihood, be at 52, 53. Again, meaning that it could be another 2 years of gridlock. I mean, it's a little bit unclear to me what unlocks the gridlock of the Congress right now, unless there is sort of an overwhelming victory by Obama or the Republican, and that they can ride on a mandate to sort of jam stuff through the recalcitrant system that we have. I'm increasingly of the belief, just my own analysis of the gridlock and why it is, that I think the Senate is becoming an undemocratic body. We now have, I don't think the Founding Fathers ever imagined that there would be states that had 100 times the population of other states. I mean, the entire population of California is represented by two senators, and there are significant number of states in the U.S. that have under 1 million people who have the same amount of representation. It simply doesn't make sense anymore, and based on the way our population is being increasingly concentrated in 8 to 10 very large states and a lot of other very small states, the balance is tipped, this special balance that was struck by our Founding Fathers, the balance of power is tipped to small states. And you see, small state senators continuing to dominate the Senate. And the reason that matters is that they just don't represent, they're representing a declining portion of the population, and I think increasingly out of touch, with where the American people are. Immigration reform is a great example of that, right? Immigration reform is supported by 55, 60% of the American people in every poll. And yet, where there are large concentrations of immigrants in about 8, 9, 10 states, there are only 20 senators out of 100 that really come from that part of the country, even though they represent a majority of the population, right? And so the Senate is becoming, I think, an increasingly undemocratic body, and you add to that sort of the abuse of the filibuster, and we have a body that is becoming itself. I think this is much more of a Senate problem than a House problem, is my own analysis on this. I don't know what's going to happen. I do think a lot of the Tea Party freshmen are going to lose. I think that they doubled down on an ideology that was incredibly unpopular and untested. It's not working. And I think, like in 1994, some of the driftwood that came in the tide is going to go out when the tide goes out. And I think we'll see that happen. And I think there's been both on I can speak more on the Democratic side. The DS and the GCCC are well run this cycle. They've got very strong candidates. Again, the fact that the Senate is not, could remain Democratic is a remarkable testament to the success of the Senate leadership this year and the strong recruiting cycle they had, led by Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts.
All right, I just wanted to break in real quick because we actually have a video chat question, and I just want to let everybody know that it is possible to do this, and it is the one and only Joe Garcia. We're going to see if this works here. This is a special treat for everyone. There's Joe.
I know that talks more than I do, so I'm a little worried about this. Go ahead, Joe.
Simon, I sort of just the layout, right? When you're looking at as crazy as this Gingrich resurgence is, or this, doesn't this help Romney? I mean, Romney was showing up to circus acts, and all he had to do was stay quiet, and they killed each other. But the level of their debate has gotten a little bit better. It's more intelligent. It's helping refine the argument, and I think Romney's starting to creep back up because he's obviously their nominee. But will this not sort of cut the primary process much shorter since everybody else falls out?
I don't know, because I think that I believe that to some degree, Joe, what you were saying is that Romney, you can leave Joe up there. Let's keep him up there. It's nice to see him anyway in his office. And are you in Miami, Joe? Is that where you are right now?
Sunny Miami, Simon. Sunny Miami.
And I also just want people to see the technology, Christian, so they can see how it works. Is that, Joe, what do you think of this? It's pretty cool, isn't it?
It's very interesting.
So,
it's very interesting.
I don't.
But it beats buying you lunch.
Cheaper, anyway. I don't know the answer. I don't know that I agree with you, Joe. I mean, my basic take is that I think that Romney believed he was going to win. I don't think they saw any of their opposition as serious. I think they viewed them as all could be taken. They knew these sort of flash in the pans were, actually in some ways helpful to him. Gingrich is not the same as Herman Cain or Michelle Bachmann. I mean, he's not made up of the same material. He's a very serious guy. I mean, he is one of the most influential political figures of the last 30 years in American politics. He's obviously, massively flawed in all the ways that we've all been hearing about in the last couple weeks. But as somebody who was active in Washington politics, involved in the Clinton era here, I have an enormous amount of personal respect for Newt Gingrich. I mean, I don't agree with him on many things, but he is an order of magnitude more serious, more sophisticated, more politically savvy. The guy worked in elections all over the country. He oversaw the election victory in 1994, which they say was the first time the Republicans had won in 40 years. What's really true, it's the first time the Republicans had control of Congress for more than 2 years since the 1920s, right? I mean, this was a hugely significant pulling apart of the 60-year congressional control by the Democrats. This guy's got intellectual chops, political chops. His language is comfortable for conservatives. He does well on television. If I had to bet today, I would bet on Newt over Mitt. I mean, I think it is more likely that Newt Gingrich wins because there is something going on with Mitt Romney in the Republican primary audience. Whether it's this, Joe, let's just take one example, right? If you look at all the southern states where there's a much higher percentage of evangelical voters than there is in other parts of the country in the Republican primary audience, right now, Gingrich is winning in these states by 10, 20, 30 points, right? Because I do think that that certain conservative Republicans just aren't going to go to Romney ever. Or if they do, it's going to be last man standing, and they'd rather vote for him over Obama. But the enthusiasm gap that existed between the two parties in 2010 is completely eroded now. All the measures, the Democratic audience is as enthusiastic about voting in 2012 as the Republican audience is, in part because the Republican field sucks, frankly, by any historical measure. I mean, there really isn't a unflawed, strong, charismatic Republican figure that's out there that's capable of uniting the party. And I think resignation is setting in on the Republican side rather than enthusiasm. I think Newt, I don't know. It's possible, and I've said this earlier, it is possible that my read on Newt is more romantic than pragmatic. But I thought he was incredibly impressive last night. I thought his language was just much more red meat to conservative voters than what Romney was throwing out. He sounded like a conservative. Romney sounds like a guy who isn't conservative trying his best to sort of step over and get close and is uncomfortable with it. So we'll see. I mean, I just don't, I had this feeling in 2008. I mean, my gut feeling is that Mitt Romney is not going to be president of the United States in 2013. He either gets beat in the primary or gets beat by Obama. I just don't think he's a good politician. He hasn't won a lot of elections. He's not very good on the stump. He comes off as kind of a phony, guy. I don't know. I'm not worried. I'm not scared of Romney. I mean, if I were the Obama team, I'm not scared of Romney. I think Gingrich becomes an intellectual, phenomenal debate, Joe. Right? What a treat it would be to have Newt Gingrich as the Republican nominee, right? For us next year, for the country, because there would be an unbelievable debate about our future that would be way more interesting than Mitt, who ducks everything and is, playing it safe rather than playing to win. And I think at the end of the day, if I could summarize, that's where Romney made a massive strategic mistake. They were playing it safe. They didn't play to win. At this point, 4 years ago, Romney had spent $11 million on television. He spent $1 million on television. Why weren't they spending money in Iowa? Why weren't they advertising? Why weren't they? He's only been to Iowa 4 or 5 times, right? What were they doing in this election? I mean, there is a real set of legitimate questions about the competency of the Romney campaign this year, and the fact that they didn't put this thing away, when they had the opportunity to do so. Long answer to your question, Joe. But
it's a good answer. Thank you.
Let's talk later about this crazy Cuba stuff that happened the last 24 hours. I'd like to get your take on it.
I thought it was good. The president did well. Right? It was impressive.
Anything else, anybody? If Jed's, I can't tell you because my son may be watching right now. It's a present for Santa left a present in our office for my children today. So, but thank you for asking, Alicia. Okay, everybody, thanks for your time. If you have any feedback for us, send it in or put it up on the chat box right now. We'd love your on the content or on the actual mechanism that we use to speak to you today. We're pretty excited about the Spreecast thing, but we also want to get your feedback and appreciate you spending time with us today. And have a great holiday, and we'll catch all of you in the new year. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.